There is a moment in a woman's life that most people don't notice. No announcement, no argument, no dramatic exit, just a shift. She stops explaining herself, not because she has nothing to say, but because she finally understands something. The more she explained, the less she was heard. At first she tried. She was patient. She repeated herself. She softened her words so they wouldn't hurt. She gave context. She gave reasons. She gave chances. Not once. Many times. Because she believed that if she communicated clearly enough, if she stayed calm enough, if she cared enough, things would change. But they didn't. And slowly, something inside her started to break. Not loudly. Quietly. She began to notice that no matter how carefully she spoke, she was still misunderstood. No matter how much she gave, it was never enough. No matter how many times she explained, she was still treated the same. And that's when the shift begins. Not in anger, in clarity. Because she starts to see something most people avoid. It was never about understanding. It was about tolerance. And she had been tolerating too much. This is the moment everything changes. Not on the outside, on the inside. And once that shift happens, nothing goes back to the way it was. She was not always like this. There was a time when she believed in being understood. She believed that if something felt wrong, the solution was to talk about it, to explain it clearly, to give the other person a chance to see what she was seeing. So she did what most people are taught to do. She communicated, not once, repeatedly. She explained why something hurt, why something mattered, why something needed to change. And she did it with care. She chose her words carefully. She avoided being harsh. She tried to be fair because she wasn't trying to win. She was trying to fix something. And that matters. Because this is where most people misunderstand her. They think she talked too much. They think she was emotional. They think she was difficult, but they didn't see the intention. She was investing time, energy, patience, hoping that if she showed up the right way, the other person would meet her there. But slowly, she started noticing a pattern. The same conversations, the same explanations, the same outcomes. Nothing really changed. And that repetition does something to a person. It doesn't just frustrate them, it teaches them. It teaches them that effort is not being matched, that words are not being valued, that understanding is not the goal on the other side. And once she starts seeing that clearly, something inside her begins to shift. Not into anger, into awareness. And awareness changes how a person moves. There isn't always a single event. No one moment where everything falls apart. It's usually something small, almost ordinary. A conversation that sounds familiar. A situation she has already been through. A response she has already heard. And this time something is different. She notices it faster. The pattern, the lack of change, the way her words land and disappear. And instead of trying again, she pauses. Not because she doesn't care, because she finally sees clearly. This is not going anywhere. That realization is quiet, but it's heavy, because it closes a door she kept open for a long time. A door built on effort, on patience, on giving chances. And now she stops. Not dramatically, not with anger, just stops. She doesn't explain. She doesn't repeat herself. She doesn't try to make the other person understand. And that silence says more than everything she said before, because it means something important. She is no longer trying to fix what is not being met. And that is the breaking point. Not when she speaks louder, when she decides she is done speaking at all. After that moment, the way she moves changes, not loudly, subtly. But if you're paying attention, it's obvious. She stops over-explaining simple things. She says what she needs to say once, clearly. And then she watches. Not for words, for behavior. Because she is no longer trying to convince anyone. She is observing. And that changes everything. Her energy becomes more contained, more intentional. She doesn't rush to fill silence. She doesn't chase understanding. She allows space. And in that space, people reveal who they are. Some step up, some stay the same, some disappear. And she accepts all three, without forcing an outcome, because she finally understands something most people resist. If someone wanted to understand, they would have. If someone wanted to meet her where she stands, they would have. So she stops trying to carry both sides of the connection. And that is where her power comes from. Not from control, from clarity. She knows what she said. She knows what she offered. She knows what she's willing to tolerate. And once those lines are clear, she doesn't need to repeat them. She just lives by them. When she stops explaining herself, people notice. Not immediately, but over time. Because something feels different. The conversations change, the access changes, the way she responds changes, and not everyone is comfortable with that. Some people will ask what's wrong, why she's so quiet, why she's not saying as much anymore. And the truth is, nothing is wrong. She's just no longer repeating what has already been ignored. Others will try to pull her back into the old dynamic. They'll question her, challenge her, push her to explain again. Not because they want clarity, because they want familiarity. They were used to her effort, used to her patience, used to her carrying the weight of understanding. And now that it's gone, they feel it. And sometimes they'll call it cold. They'll say she changed, that she's distant, that she's different. And they're right. She is, but not in the way they think. She didn't become cold. She became clear. She didn't become distant. She stopped overextending. And for people who benefited from her explaining everything, that shift feels like loss. Because it is. They lost access to a version of her that no longer exists. And that's where the tension comes in. Because not everyone will meet her at this new level. Some will fall away, some will resist, and some will finally show up differently. But either way, she doesn't go back. What she gains from this shift is not louder. It's deeper. She gains space. Space in her mind. Space in her day. Space from conversations that went nowhere. And in that space, something important returns. Clarity. She starts to see things faster. Patterns that used to take weeks to understand now become obvious in minutes. Because she is no longer distracted by trying to fix what isn't changing. She also gains energy. Not because life became easier, because she stopped spending energy where it was never respected. And that changes how she shows up. More focused, more grounded, less reactive. She no longer needs to prove her point, or convince anyone of her value, because she knows it. And that internal certainty removes pressure. The pressure to be understood by everyone. The pressure to explain every decision. The pressure to keep something alive that should have ended. She also gains something most people underestimate. Peace. Not the kind that comes from everything going right. The kind that comes from being aligned with herself. From knowing she said what needed to be said. Did what needed to be done. And now she can move forward without carrying extra weight. And with that, her standards become real. Not something she talks about, something she lives. And once a woman reaches that point, she does not need to announce it. It shows in how she moves, in what she accepts, in what she walks away from without hesitation. From that point on, everything becomes clearer. Not easier. Clearer. Because she no longer needs to question herself the way she used to. She said what needed to be said. She gave what needed to be given. And now she moves based on what she sees, not what she hopes. That changes how she chooses, how she speaks, how she stays, and how she leaves. She no longer waits for people to understand her. She pays attention to whether they do. And if they don't, she doesn't argue. She adjusts, quietly. This is where her standards become visible, not through words, through decisions. She doesn't chase clarity anymore, she lives in it. And that makes her harder to confuse, harder to manipulate, harder to keep in situations that don't match her values. Not because she became distant, because she became aligned. And once a woman is aligned with herself, she stops negotiating. Not out of pride, out of awareness. She knows the difference between being heard and being tolerated, between being valued and being kept around. And she chooses accordingly. Every time. The version of her that kept explaining everything is gone. Not because she didn't care, because she finally understood. And once that understanding becomes clear, it doesn't reverse. She doesn't need to prove anything. She doesn't need to convince anyone. She just moves. And the right people will meet her there.